Welcome to the deep dive. We know you've got a lot going on, and sometimes, well, you need to get the gist of something important fast.
Exactly. And today we're tackling that by diving into some notes a listener took during a U.S. presidential debate. This was back in September 2024.
Right, and our aim here isn't just a simple recap. We want to dig a bit deeper, understand the core differences, maybe the why behind the candidates' positions.
To sort of cut through the noise, yeah, based purely on what this one observer picked out as key.
So you can really form your own informed view. That's the mission today. Provide a clear, unbiased look at the contrasting viewpoints presented on some critical issues.
Okay, let's start. Where should we begin? The economy.
Yeah, let's kick up with the economy. So, according to these notes, one candidate felt the economy should serve everyone based on their effort.
Standard enough idea?
But, and this is the key part from the notes, they stress that the current methods need to change, specifically for people with disabilities, the elderly, and children, too.
Ah, okay. So an emphasis on inclusivity beyond the traditional workforce. That suggests maybe a shift towards, I don't know, a more social welfare view.
Could be. It broadens that definition of, economic contribution or who the economy should be working for.
Right. Recognizing that some groups might need different kinds of support to, participate or just benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the notes on the other candidate, Trump, on the economy specifically from this debate.
Yes.
Well, there aren't many details here. The listener didn't capture a specific counterproposal in this section.
Okay, so that lack of detail is the detail, in a way. It sets up a contrast. One side proposing systemic change for inclusivity, the other, well, not clearly defined in these particular notes.
A potential difference in emphasis during that specific exchange, at least.
Definitely. Okay, what's next? Abortion. Always a major topic.
Yeah, and a really clear clash here based on the notes. One candidate leaned towards individual choice.
But with a condition.
Yes, but advised against abortion after 40 days of pregnancy. The notes don't explain the 40 days, but it often relates to, certain milestones or beliefs.
Interesting. So acknowledging autonomy, but also setting a kind of guideline, trying to navigate that very tricky ethical line.
Seems like it. An attempt maybe to bridge different views, though likely not satisfying everyone.
Probably not. And the other side? Trump.
The notes are blunt. No freedom on abortion. That's the direct quote capture.
Wow. Okay, so no ambiguity there. It's a fundamental split, really.
Yeah.
Individual rights versus a much more restrictive stance.
Precisely. One valuing autonomy, maybe with a temporal limit, the other emphasizing different values entirely.
Right, like sanctity of life arguments.
Okay, moving on. Border security.
Another big one. So one candidate, according to the notes, proposed a few things. Using radar for detection.
Okay,
requiring documentation and a legal process for entry, and setting up qualification centers.
Qualification centers. To assess eligibility for residency, presumably. That's the implication, yeah. And critically, this candidate was against forceful returns.
So the focus is on controlled, documented entry, a legal path, and avoiding sending people back to, well, potentially dangerous situations.
It sounds like a system based on processing and assessment rather than just deterrence.
And the contrast. Trump's view in the notes.
The notes say Trump wanted to make the border harder to get there, but don't prevent it entirely. That's a bit ambiguous, perhaps?
A little, yeah. Harder, but not impossible. What else?
But then it adds, and this is stark, he wants to send people back to the horror life they're having, which they want to escape from.
Okay, that's much clearer. A focus on restriction, deterrence, and return, even if it's back to hardship or danger. Big ethical questions there.
Definitely. The priority seems different, managing and processing versus deterring and returning.
Yeah, a very clear distinction in the notes. Okay, what about the weaponization of the Justice Department?
Right. So one perspective noted was that judging past cases isn't the problem itself.
Okay, so what is the problem then?
Granting immunity, that was flagged as the real issue. The principle seems to be about accountability. No one should be exempt.
So reviewing past actions legally, okay. Giving a free pass for the future, not okay. Is that the idea?
That's what it sounds like, yeah. Focusing on that shield of immunity as the concern.
And how does Trump fit into this, according to the notes?
Well, the notes then mention that Trump claimed unfairness after his conviction and had requested and received immunity.
So it connects the principle directly to him, claiming unfairness while also seeking protection.
The notes seem to highlight that juxtaposition, it really makes you think, about the implications of immunity, especially for powerful figures.
It definitely raises questions about fairness, accountability, and how those apply.
Now, there is also this kind of philosophical point that came up in the notes about opinions.
Oh, like what?
The listener noted someone arguing that changing your opinion based on new, better information, that's a good thing.
Okay, intellectual flexibility.
Oh,
Makes
okay.
sense.
But refusing to change, even when the evidence is strong, that was labeled real ignorance.
Strong words. So valuing the ability to learn and adapt, especially you'd think in a leader, not seeing it as weakness, but strength.
Exactly. Intellectual humility, maybe. Seems relevant.
Definitely. Okay, what followed that? Election integrity.
Yeah, election integrity. The point made in the notes was that denying scored election results is wrong.
Causes confusion, conflict.
Right, especially after the process is explained, and challenges should happen before or during the election, not after the fact.
So respecting the process once it's concluded.
Pretty much, and the notes specifically call out Trump for denying the election after it was, quote, scored.
Undermining trust in the system is the core concern there, it seems. Acceptance of results is kind of fundamental to democracy.
Yeah, the peaceful transfer of power relies on it. Okay, shifting internationally now. Palestine and Israel.
A deeply difficult situation. What did the notes capture?
One candidate was noted as saying very clearly the war should not be happening. Full stop.
Okay. And beyond that?
Asserting no one should be killed without a court order, and that if innocents are killed, even in war, the fighting must stop.
Prosecution for those responsible.
Prosecution or forceful intervention to stop them. They called for a ceasefire, but crucially, with a plan for forceful intervention and court proceedings.
Wow, that's a very strong stance on the rule of law and civilian protection, even amidst conflict. Proactive intervention included.
It prioritizes stopping the violence and ensuring accountability, it seems. Now, the contrast.
Let me guess.
Trump. The notes say Trump wants the war to continue. The note-taker added this was the worst thing anybody could say.
A very different perspective, allowing the conflict to go on.
Then Kamala.
The notes say she supports a ceasefire,
Okay.
but lack the concrete plan for enforcing it, according to this observer.
So you have the spectrum, immediate stop with enforcement, continuation, or ceasefire without a clear how. Big differences in approach.
Huge. Okay, sticking with international affairs, Ukraine and Russia.
Also quite direct notes here. One candidate. Russia's invasion is unacceptable. Period.
And the response should be?
UN and NATO should forcefully stop Russia if they don't withdraw. So collective security, international law.
A strong stance against aggression using established alliances.
The alternative noted for Trump, give Russia all they ask.
Whoa, that's appeasement.
Okay.
Essentially. A major shift from traditional U.S. foreign policy, potentially.
Stark contrast again. Fundamentally different ways of dealing with global conflict.
Absolutely. What about Afghanistan? Did that come up?
Briefly, the point noted was that the U.S. invasion kind of made an eventual retreat necessary.
A logical consequence.
That's the framing. A retreat like the one Biden and Kamala oversaw, while Trump, the notes say, wanted to remain.
So a difference in perspective on long-term military presence, its costs, its effectiveness, intervention versus withdrawal.
Yeah, weighing those long-term implications. Okay, let's talk about race.
Always sensitive. What did the notes say?
The idea presented was that race should be about understanding, not hatred. And racial labels.
Yeah.
Insignificant, unless used as insults.
Okay, a focus on shared humanity over division.
But then the notes observed that Trump did use racial labels in his campaign.
And Kamala.
Apparently didn't object, according to this listener's observation. So it highlights this difference in how race is discussed, or maybe weaponized, in politics.
The power of language, either to bridge or divide. Interesting observation.
Okay, nearing the end of the topics here.
Yeah.
Healthcare.
Let's hear it.
One candidate, the notes say, proposed tax-funded healthcare, calling it a humanitarian need.
A universal government-funded system, essentially.
Seems like it. Contrasting it directly with Obamacare and Trump's plan, which the notes just say requires individual payments, without detail on Trump specifics.
So a philosophical divide.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare is a public good versus something individuals are primarily responsible for, perhaps through market mechanisms.
That captures the core difference noted, yeah. Public responsibility versus individual payment models.
Got it. Guns.
Yeah.
Always a contentious issue.
And a very clear divergence here, too. One candidate, according to the notes, advocated confiscating citizen guns.
Confiscating?
Yeah.
And replacing them with...
safer options, like tasers. That was the specific example noted.
Wow, that's a significant position. And the others.
Both Trump and Kamala noted as supporting gun ownership.
So, a radical proposal on one side versus support for the status quo, or at least the right to bear arms, on the other. Huge difference.
Absolutely massive divergence there. Okay, finally, climate change.
What was the take here?
It's a bit mixed for one candidate. Notes say they favored adaptation strategies and, interestingly, promoted fossil fuels for clean air.
Fossil fuels for clean air. That needs clarification, I'd say.
Yeah, it's an odd juxtaposition in the notes, but also supported electric cars and had specific ideas for rising temperatures and water levels.
Like what?
Watering lands, creating water resources, sort of practical adaptation ideas.
Okay, so a focus on adapting to effects, plus some unique energy ideas. And the others.
Trump, portrayed as not caring about clean air, prioritizing money. And both Trump and Kamala noted as lacking specific plans for water rise and temperature issues.
So one side focused on adaptation, with some quirks. The others perceived as lacking concrete plans for impacts, or maybe just prioritizing differently.
That seems to be the takeaway from these notes, a mix of adaptation focus versus perceived indifference or lack of specific strategy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground based on this one listener's debate notes.
We really have. And wrapping this up, you can see some really significant differences emerge. Economic inclusion, abortion rights, border strategies, accountability.
Yeah, and views on international conflict, election integrity, even down to things like healthcare funding and guns. Very different paths proposed.
And the thing is, these aren't just minor policy tweaks, are they?
No, not at all. They often point to, fundamentally different philosophies, different ideas about government's role, individual liberties, society's priorities.
Exactly. And maybe that's the final thought for you, listening. As you process all this, think about those underlying philosophies.
Which vision resonates more with how you see things? Go beyond just the specific policy bullet points.
Consider the bigger picture, the principles behind the positions. Because this deep dive, it's really just a starting point.
Absolutely. We hope it's given you a clearer framework based on these notes.
Yeah.
But definitely keep exploring, keep reading, seek out other perspectives.
Form your own well-rounded understanding. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.